This is gonna be my first spooky book of the season. I'm so excited. Even one of his least scary books will still be scary for me because also I'm a scaredy cat. Hi everyone, it's me. Welcome to another video. It's October and we're gonna read some spooky books this week. I've been waiting a long time for this season, for this vibe, for this mood, and so I'm so excited to just like get into some spooky books. So let's see what spooky books I have to read on my TBR first, and we'll decide on our first book for this week. So right off the bat, out of my October TBR that I've already selected, there are two spooky books on it. The first one is Starling House by Alex E. Harrow, which has been staring at me from the shelf for so long. I've been wanting to read this for so long and the season has finally come. We have, I think, some sort of a reclusive author who disappeared. His house or her house becomes haunted, and we have this, this whole like haunted gothic house type of a vibe where our main characters then, I suppose, like have to explore it or have to go in it for whatever reason. And yeah, this one just sounds perfectly spooky, like moody, vibey, mysterious. That's Starling House. That is definitely one I want to read this week. I also have Fairy Tale by Stephen King, which I just assumed this book would be spooky because it's by Stephen King and like it looks pretty spooky. But a lot of you guys have told me that this book actually is not spooky. Like it's the least scary Stephen King book. So I am not gonna believe it's not spooky until I read it and experience it for myself. This is about a high school kid who befriends another reclusive person. Both of these books are kind of based on like reclusive weirdos. This high school student, befriends this reclusive neighbor. The neighbor dies and then leaves his entire house to the teenager for whatever reason. The teenager goes into the house. Apparently he finds some like old tapes that the neighbor has left him, and that just kind of like starts his journey into like what's really going on in this house and everything. To me, that sounds really scary. Like the whole cassette tape thing. I watched that show on Netflix a couple years ago. What was it? It was like about tapes. The guy was hired to archive some tapes or something. I don't remember what it was called, but if I find it, I'll put it on screen here. That was a really scary show. And like when I think of like tapes, like cassette tapes or videotapes or any other types of tapes that are saved, passed on, and then viewed by like the next person, I feel like that's always just so scary because there's that. And then there was also, what was that movie? I'm not remembering the names of anything right now. There's that movie that's like a really popular horror movie that is like based on like home videos, like tapes. And that was like terrifying for me. So I don't know, I get that vibe from this, but it's also, I know it's twisted also into fantasy as well. So I'm still gonna consider this as a spooky book for now until I read it and realize it's not spooky. But that is an option for this week. And then I think I have a bunch of thrillers here on my TBR. The first one is The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. I read The Only One Left by Riley Sager. Really, really loved that as a thriller, and so I'm really interested in trying it more from him. This one is about Casey, who is a widowed actress. I think she's like going through a lot. So she escapes to her kind of a cottage, vacation home type of a thing to just like try and have some peace, but she ends up grabbing some binoculars for whatever reason and spying on her neighbors and finding out there's like a lot of, I don't know, weird, sinister things going on behind closed doors. And so that is The House Across the Lake. We have another Stephen King. This one is Holly. I think this is a return of like a Stephen King character that's appeared in another Stephen King book. I think that's why a lot of people say don't read this one first. Do you think this could be read as a standalone, like without all the background info from his other books? Let me know, because I've had this on my shelf for a while and I just also want to get into it. This is about Holly, who's a recurring character apparently in the Stephen King universe. She is a detective. Someone hires her to help find their missing daughter. There's COVID in this book. Her partner Pete has COVID. I kind of get sad when I like read things or watch things and they mention COVID. It's just kind of like a little bit triggering for me still. I have The Quiet Tenant. This one is about a man who is a serial killer, but this story is told by the POVs of some of the women he is around. I have The Guest List by Lucy Foley. This one sounds really interesting. I didn't love The Paris Apartment by her, but I'm gonna give her another chance. We have a wedding on a remote Irish island. We have 5 characters: the bride, the +1, the best man, the wedding planner, and the bridesmaid. There's a murder and they have to figure out amongst them who did it. The last one I have is 5 Survive by Holly Jackson. This is going to be the 3rd chance I give Holly Jackson to see if I enjoy her books. This one also sounds really interesting. We have a bunch of teenagers, I think, who are going on a road trip, or maybe like young adults. I don't know how old they are. Their RV breaks down in the middle of nowhere and then realize someone wants them dead. And I think this book spans literally only 8 hours. Like this entire book covers 8 hours, and I find that really interesting because that means we're gonna get a lot of details on like what exactly is happening. And I think I like that in a thriller. When you get a lot of details, then you can use those to try and piece things together and what's going on. So this one sounds really, really interesting. Oh wait, I did have one more. I'll Be Waiting by Kelly Armstrong. I actually received this as an ARC a while ago, but I haven't read it yet. And this book actually comes out now, like in October 2024. So I think I better read this now. This is about Nicola, who has cystic fibrosis. Never thought she would live like past her 30s, but she has managed to do so, and she actually got married. But a few months after she got married, her husband unfortunately died in a car accident, and says, I don't know, this must be some sort of an important detail, but it says in the plot synopsis, when he dies in the car crash, he utters to her with his final breath, I'll be waiting for you. And so this moment, I guess, becomes public. Maybe someone caught a video of it, and it seems like he never actually said that. It was his ghost that said that. So then Nicola starts like diving into all this like stuff with mediums. I'm assuming there's a Ouija board involved because of the cover here. And this sounds all types of spooky. I think she also finds a body, and it sounds scary. I don't know. These are all the books on my current spooky TBR. We're gonna make our way through some of these. We'll see how much we can read in this next week. I'm excited. This looks like a really good collection. I think I do want to start with Starling House. As I mentioned, this is just like, it's been on my shelf for so long. It's been like teasing me. Every time I look at it, I'm like, I want to read that book so bad. So I'm gonna start with Starling House. This is gonna be my first spooky book of the season. I'm so excited. Guys, I need to update you before I devour this entire book. So I started reading this yesterday. Honestly, I didn't read for that much time yesterday because I was just busy doing things, but I already got halfway through the book, so we need to talk about it, yeah, before I just like devour the entire thing. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, this is very like gothic, spooky, kind of like fairy tale a little bit. Our FMC is named Opal, who starts off the book like not very well off. It's her and her younger brother, and she's just like one of those characters that has to like be responsible for their younger sibling. She feels like it's her responsibility to take care of him. They don't have parents, and yeah, they're just kind of like crashing at a motel. So they're living in a motel room and just like struggling through life. When Opal was like a younger child, she was really obsessed with this horror novel that her mom gave to her. And this horror book was actually written by E. Starling, who lived in the Starling house, and a lot of the book, I think all of the book, was about the Starling house and the beasts that like live in it. So Opal's like just really, really intrigued at this real life Starling house that she walks past pretty much every day, like on her way to and from work. One day she feels like especially drawn to the house and like stands at the front of it, like walks right up close to it, and then meets the current owner of the house, like the heir of the Starlings. And yeah, she just continues to get drawn in. I'm not gonna tell you anything more, but that's pretty much the premise of the story. It's her about this house that's like in this spooky novel. There's a lot of like mystery and things, like mysterious deaths, and it's so vibey. It's like the perfect October mood. I don't think it's like that scary, to be honest. It's not like thrillery, it's not like in your face scary, but the mood is spooky, if that makes sense. So I'm really enjoying this. I think the one thing that I'm not really a fan of in this book, I'm trying to find an example. Throughout the entire book, we have like footnotes like so, and these pop up a lot throughout the entire book. And I don't know about you, but I'm not really a footnotes type of a girly because it just makes me feel like I'm reading a textbook or like I'm studying for school. So it's not really like my favorite thing having footnotes. Like I feel like it just takes me out of the story a bit. I would rather just read continuous text versus like read a page, look at the bottom and be like, oh, there's just like extra information about this like one thing that was mentioned. Why wasn't that just like put in the regular text, you know what I mean? I feel like maybe it's like a stylized preference thing. I'm sure there's people out there that enjoy this footnotes style of telling a story, but it's not really my thing. But other than that, like the whole mood of everything and the vibe, it's really great. We also throughout the book have these like beautiful illustrations, and I just love that, especially for like a moody spooky book like this. It just adds so much more like atmosphere and feeling to the book, so I'm really loving that. It's kind of reminding me of, what was it, Gallant by V.E. Schwab, where we had all the illustrations kind of like intermingled throughout the book. And honestly, the story is kind of similar to Gallant by V.E. Schwab. It's similar, but where Gallant was more, I think, just pure vibes, less plot, like less logical detail and backstory. Starling House is a more like logical backstory filled version of Gallant, now that I'm thinking about it. But I'm really loving it. I'm probably gonna devour this and just like finish it today. So we'll see how the rest of it goes. Just finished this. My final rating for the Starling House, I think, is gonna be a 3.25. It's one of those books that was so good in the setup. Like so good. The mood was there, like the writing is really descriptive and like ambient, like it really sets the environment that you're in, and I think the whole premise of the book was really good. Again, as I mentioned, it was very similar to the premise of Gallant, which is actually, surprisingly, another book where I said kind of the same thing after reading it, where the setup of it was so good and I was so interested, but then I kind of lost interest by the end of it, or it didn't wrap up the way I wanted it to, and Bob's is going crazy. Hi! Oh, he just brought me a little mouse. Oh, I wish you guys saw that. I wish I caught that on camera. Bob's just brought me this little yellow mouse. I love you, Bubs, thank you. I'm trying to like put into words why I lost interest at the end of the book. I think it's because of a couple things. So the first thing is there were two or kind of three main storylines of this book that were all connected, that were all happening at the same time to the same character. But for some reason, the three storylines felt very disjointed. Like they were all interconnected. They all kind of like made sense together, but I think the mood of each storyline was very different, and because of that, like when we were transitioning from like one storyline to the other, it really felt like we were in separate books. Like we'd be in one scene and I'd be like, okay, we're in this type of a book, and then we'd go to another scene and be like, okay, this feels like a completely different book. Things just felt very segmented, disjointed, not harmonious and flowing together, and I think that's the biggest issue I had with the way that this book unfolded. It was just one of those that like by the end I didn't really care. I do think it's still a good book to read in October. Like I would still recommend you pick this up in October and give it a try for the vibe, for the mood. Maybe you end up liking it more than I did. But yeah, I feel like it had a lot of potential, and it didn't quite live up to the setup, which is funny because if you guys look at the cover on the front, there's like a little endorsement comment from Olivia Blake. And if you guys know me, if you guys have been following me and you know my reading journey and you know my thoughts on Olivia Blake, I tend to say the exact same thing about her books, is that I love her writing style. I love the setups of her stories and her characters, but then the way the story unfolds always falls apart for me. And it's funny that her name is literally here in the book. Like, she endorsed it, and I feel the same way about this book. Like, maybe it's just a style of storytelling that I don't mesh with. There was also a romance in the story that I thought was fine. It was fine. It didn't make me scream, giggle, kick my feet, but it wasn't like terrible. It was just like, okay, it's there. It's a part of the story. Starling House. Let's pick up our next spooky read. That's why we're sitting here at my TBR cart. I have Fairy Tale up there by Stephen King on top of my other shelf just because it's part of my October TBR. And that's the book I really should be picking up because I'm supposed to be prioritizing my October TBR this month. But I just don't feel like I'm in the mood for another like spooky magical book right now because that's what this was. I kind of want something more real world, more thriller, maybe something that will keep me engaged more. So I think I have the perfect book. It's going to be Five Survive, which I talked to you guys. I introduced all my spooky books to you at the beginning of this video, so I don't have to tell you guys again what this is about, I don't think. This is going to be, hi Sage, this is going to be my final try, my final chance at a Holly Jackson book, and we'll see if this is good, but it sounds really intriguing. I think the fact that this book takes over the span of only 8 hours from beginning to end is gonna be really interesting to read. I wanna feel kind of like that claustrophobic feeling, you know, when you're reading a book or like watching a movie that's like really detailed, has like kind of a ticking time bomb kind of a thing. I'm hoping this gives me that like uncomfortable feeling. So Five Survive, second spooky book of the season. Let's read it. So I got up to like the first part. I just read a little bit last night. So the book starts at 10 p.m. I think I showed you a clip of when I like first started reading. And I got up to 11 p.m. if you can see there. So it looks like the book is split into, I suppose, like 8 parts for the 8 hours that the book takes place over, or the story takes place over. So I find that just like so exciting. I love that concept. I love how the book is divided into like equally time sensitive parts. Like, it just, I love the structure of that. Like, you know, there's 8 parts, you know, each part's gonna be an hour long. I feel like in terms of pacing, that's like a genius way for an author to make sure like they're staying on pace, there's something exciting happening in each part, and like parts of the story, like arcs, aren't like disproportionate in relation to each other. So I find that really cool. I'm enjoying it so far, but yeah, I've only read the first part, so I'm like just getting into it, obviously. I just feel like we're getting very much like classic horror movie, like slasher vibes. Like, we have 6, some of them are teenagers, some of them are young adults. I think they're like a little bit different in age, but like we have 6 of these kind of like young people out in an RV in the woods. Their RV breaks down and then like stuff starts happening. Nothing crazy has happened yet in the first part. We're just kind of like setting the scene, but already I feel like it's like setting that kind of like creepy mood. Not creepy, just like slashery, you know? It's very cabin in the woods. Yeah, I'm having fun so far. Just finished it. That was a really quick read, actually. Where did I even last talk to you? I think I was only on like the 2nd hour of the book, or maybe I was a little further, but while I was reading the book, I was like, I am totally missing the opportunity here to read this during a 24-hour readathon. Like, the fact that each chapter takes over the span of an hour, that'd be so fun reading it by the hour. Like, reading one part of it and then waiting for the next hour and reading it like as the time goes by, so you're really spending like the night with these characters. That would have been so fun. Like, what a missed opportunity on my part. I like literally just did a 24-hour readathon like a few weeks ago, and I was in that readathon debating reading this, like picking up this as my next read, and I didn't. But that literally would have been the perfect time to read something like this. But anyways, I thought this was really fun. I did end up giving it a 3.5 stars. I think overall, while the story was fast-paced and exciting and everything, the way it wrapped up was just a little abrupt for me, and it wasn't like as satisfying as I would have hoped for a thriller. I want more things to be tied together at the end. I think a couple of things were just like left a bit open-ended, and maybe it was on purpose, but like I need closure. I need conclusion. And I didn't really like the open-ended type of an ending. But yeah, it was fun. I also find that like with a lot of the thrillers I've been reading recently, a lot of them are set like after a crime has taken place, you know what I mean? A lot of them are like mystery thrillers where our main characters are trying to like solve a mystery that happened a while ago. And I think this one was really fun and unique and kind of refreshing to read because we were literally in the action. It's not like we were trying to solve like a missing persons case from 30 years ago. It was like we were just in the thick of it. I did have fun reading it. So I think my final verdict, I guess not my final verdict. Yes, H. My verdict for now about Holly Jackson is I'm not going to swear her off forever at this point. I'm gonna try more of her books. I think, yeah, baby. Oh, you can't even see her. She's like right here below the camera. I think with Holly Jackson at this point, I think if she publishes another book that has a very... Hi, baby. If she publishes a book that has a very cool sounding synopsis like this one that like really draws me in, I think I would still pick it up. But I think for her more like normal sounding thrillers, maybe I wouldn't pick them up. I don't know. I'm not swearing her off forever because honestly, I think this is my favorite book that I've read from her so far. So there's still hope yet. That being said, I'm gonna pick up my third scary book for this week, which is Fairy Tale by Stephen King. I know some of you are saying this isn't scary, but it's Stephen King, so I don't believe you. And I've never read Stephen King before, so I feel like even one of his least scary books will still be scary for me because also I'm a scaredy cat. I actually, the other day, like 2 nights ago, I went to this like haunted spooky house, like haunted walk thing at Casa Loma in Toronto. I do not like these things. I don't like these haunted spooky houses and haunted walks and stuff. I'm such a scaredy cat and I literally got like scared out of my mind. And I think in the spirit of this video being kind of a spooky theme video, I'll show you some clips of how that night went. It was 2 nights ago. There are some pretty funny clips of me just being terrified, but if you do not want to see like kind of scary looking things, obviously everything's fake. Everything's fake because it's like a setup, it's a set, it's like a haunted house. But if you don't want to see anything like disturbingly spooky, like haunted house vibe, skip to this time code now. But if you do want to see that stuff and see me be like just scared, enjoy a couple of clips of me being terrified out of my mind, and then let's start Fairy Tale. Alright guys, quick update. Excuse my appearance right now, it's chores day, but I read about 100 pages of this yesterday, and I should have listened to you guys because it's really not spooky, at least so far. I wonder if it'll get spookier later, but I kind of doubt it because a lot of you were telling me that this is not a spooky book. And of course, I was being stubborn and I picked it up in a spooky theme reading vlog. I should really just listen to you guys more. I feel like there are some spooky elements to it that have the potential to be spooky. Like there's the weird neighbor's house that's kind of like described as like off-putting, a little bit weird, a little scary. There's like a mysterious shed there. Like there are elements in this book that could be spooky, but I feel like the way it's written makes it not feel spooky. Like the writing style is not scary. It's not setting the mood. So it's kind of interesting to read because you're reading about something like a story and these events that like should be scary, but they don't feel scary. And I don't know if that's a Stephen King thing because, again, I've never read any of his other books, but I'm assuming it's not because, like, Stephen King is known for, like, being scary and horror. I've seen Stephen King movies and they are scary, so I don't know what it is. The other thing is I feel like the pace of the story is very slow. Like, it's a pretty slow moving pace. I'm like at the 100-page mark and I feel like barely anything has happened. We're still kind of establishing the scene. I feel like we're not in like the meat of the story yet. And I know it's a pretty long book. I think this is about 500, 600 pages. So it's pretty long, but like 100 pages in, I feel like we're not really getting anywhere yet. And I'm just like waiting for the story to pick up. But one thing I do like is we have illustrations. I love an illustrated book. There's also actual chapter titles, which I'm still making up my mind about whether or not I like the chapter titles. They're very like to the point. The chapter titles in this book really say like what exactly happens in that chapter. Like this one, chapter 6, is called Hospital Visit, The Safe, Stantonville, Gold Greed, Mr. Bowditch Comes Home. Like it really tells you what's about to happen. And it's a little bit like spoilery if you think about it in a certain sense, but I'll get back to you on that one, on how I like it. That's fairy tale so far. Waiting for it to get spooky, but again, as you guys said, it might not actually get spooky. But we're gonna keep reading it anyways. It's a couple days later. I finished it. Unfortunately, it kind of breaks my heart to say this, but unfortunately, I didn't really love this book. I should have maybe listened to you guys more, but the thing is, okay, here's the thing. I feel like half of you guys were telling me to not start with fairy tale as the first Stephen King book like I've ever read because it's not really a typical Stephen King book is what I've heard from you guys. A different writing style. A lot of you were saying it's not as scary as his usual books. But then the other half of you guys were telling me to start with this because it is very fantasy and I feel like maybe the fantasy plus the horror bridge like would be good in this book for me to like get started into his world. And I feel like that was really good thinking, but I think overall I just wanted something like actually spooky. Like I wanted a more typical Stephen King book, so this didn't really do it for me. I wanted something scary. I wanted something that felt like October, like Halloween, and I didn't get that. But the weird thing is about this book is that I feel like it could have been written more spooky. The story itself, it could have had a very spooky undertone, like a vibe, but instead it was written as just this sort of like quirky adventure novel. Like there were elements in it and parts of the story where I was like, this could have been so creepy, so spooky, but it just wasn't written that way, which kind of baffles me because Stephen King is obviously very well known for being a horror author, and this didn't feel like horror to me. Like there were maybe a few parts that were like a bit more descriptive, gory than your usual fantasy, but like it didn't feel like horror. And then also just from the cover, like, I don't know, to me this looks kind of spooky. It's like dark, there's like this scary sort of like a tunnel down into a cellar. It looks kind of like an eye. It looks kind of creepy, but it just wasn't. The other thing is I just feel like this book overall was very slow, especially like the first 150 pages. I was like, okay, when are we gonna get into the story? Like when are things gonna start happening? I feel like it was closer to the end where things started happening, but then by that point, so there's this thing about me that if by like 150 to 200 pages into a book, I at that point like already feel not connected to the characters, not caring about the story, just like not immersed in it, I feel like it's very hard for me to like at the end of the book just like switch my opinion and be like, wow, this was really great. Even when things start picking up, in my mind, I feel like I've already shut off from it in a way, you know, like I'll keep reading it to give it a chance, but it's very rare for me to like not really enjoy the first third half of a book and then really enjoy the last half and be like, okay, that was totally worth it. There were parts of this book that were kind of cute, like the first 150 pages I mentioned were kind of giving Up. Like the Pixar animated movie Up, because we have our main character is a teenager. I know he was like a younger kid in Up, but like he was a teenager. He kind of had like a young optimistic spirit, even though bad things had happened to him. We had the like old grumpy man character and then the dog, and then it was like the three of them for the first 150 pages, and it just felt like Up, but like more serious, more adult. This also pulled a lot of elements of like fairy tales. I mean, it's called fairy tale, so obviously it did, but like we had a lot of reference to Rumpelstiltskin, we had reference to The Little Mermaid. We kind of like cycled through a couple different fairy tales, but in a more, not dark, because this book didn't feel dark, but in a more serious adult way, like a retelling. So yeah, lots of mixed feelings about that one, unfortunately. And it makes me sad because like Stephen King is such a beloved author. I'm not gonna write off Stephen King forever. Obviously, I know this was like kind of a wild card book from him, and I'm gonna go on and read, I don't know, more like typical, like his best classic book. So if you guys have a favorite, like an absolute favorite Stephen King book where you think would be a great place for me to start, let me know in the comments. Because I have Holly on my TBR, and a lot of you have already said that Holly's not a really good one to get started in because it's like a recurring character and you kind of need more context to read it. So I don't know. Let me know. Let me know if you think Holly's okay for me to read by Stephen King, or if I need to read more Stephen King before I get to that one. I'm gonna end this video here for now. I hope you enjoyed reading some spooky or not so spooky books with me this week. If you did like this video, please leave me a like and a comment. If you don't know what to comment down below, let me know what your favorite spooky book is. If you like me, subscribe, do that bell thing, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!